Good afternoon. My name is Ann Carmen, and I will be discussing the theology of beauty and how that affects the flourishing life. Yikes, 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 yikes. And let me guess, you have a great personality. I hope you get that reference. But really, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or at least that's what they tell us. It's what we believe. Or is it? The flourishing life is living the way that God intended things to be, according to the intended order or purpose in all aspects of life. This requires discernment and proper application of the will of God. Alexander Solenzir suggests that the meaning of earthly existence lies not as we have grown to thinking and prospering, but rather in the development of the soul. In James Bryan Smith's book, The Good and Beautiful Life, he says that a heart that loves goodness is beautiful. Thus, living for God incorporates both the volition of the soul and virtue that glorify Him, which is beautiful. Grudem explains this in Systematic Theology when he noted, "We reflect God's beauty in our own lives when we exhibit conduct that is pleasing to Him." Theologically, the unity of the Trinity and the diversity of the attributes, when in harmony, is beautiful. This is not to be confused with some Eastern mystical theology of a yin-yang balance, but rather, God is beautiful in relation to the Trinity and the perfect harmony at work within His divine attributes. But today, this is not what people believe. We see the symptoms of this issue and the influence it has had by twisting the ideals of body image, postmodern works of art, and our theology. These are manifestations of a much deeper issue. First, it affects our theology and how we understand the world. Then it affects others and how we see others and ourselves. And third, it affects the way in which we work and our motive for working. So second, in the way that it affects how we view others and ourselves, we need to remember that we are made in the image of God. And since God is spirit, this means that our image refers to the soul or spirit of every human. Therefore, every human innately possesses the quality of beauty by nature of being made in God's image. A theologian once noted the difference between a manifestation of beauty being a refraction versus a reflection. He said that it's not a reflection like a mirror because that's something that just bounces off, but rather beauty is a refraction because it's woven in us. Third, it affects our motive for working. God created us to work, to cultivate and steward things in our responsibility. Proper stewarding aims for excellence and beauty. Things done with excellence are good and will be true. Things that are good and true are beautiful. Thus, things that are beautiful represent a good, true, and flourishing life. Things are beautiful because they refract God's nature. Thus, when things are out of order, like our world, especially when we don't have any value for order, balance, and harmony, beauty is just a vain goal. Now, let's think about this. If beauty were subjective, why would we say that someone is wrong to find a malnourished woman attractive? And why are random splotches of paint on a canvas not beautiful, but just random? And for your context, I made sure that I understood the intent of this artist's work, and rest assured that there was no intent to refract God's beauty, as this was a result of an elephant with a paintbrush and a canvas. But really, for those who do find these things beautiful, should they? Doesn't that say more about the person making the claim rather than the thing in question? Things in disarray, out of order, out of line with nature, and out of God's will are not and should not be considered as beautiful. Another way to understand the misuse of the word beauty is by looking at the converse nature of ugliness. Ugliness is an evil of a sort by something acting outside of the way it was intended to be used. For example, a knife could be beautiful in its form, but ugly if it's used for killing, which is a function. In that case, it's evil. Just as a knife can be used for restoring, which is a function, it's beautiful and good. And keep in mind that I do not mean ugly, as beauty has also been misunderstood to be a mere preference, but rather according to the nature of the thing itself. Likewise, beauty is not in the eyes of the beholder and just a matter of subjective preference, but rather the object nature of the thing. It's something we all desire and all value, despite the facts that our preferences may come in varying degrees. But the deeper issue, the sickness, is corruption of good as a result of relative truth, the belief that truth is relative to an individual or group based on personal preference, regardless of other opinions, and much less regardless of reality. Living according to this philosophy will inevitably corrupt all areas of life, believing that Christ is just one way to heaven, and that art is just personal expression that's ultimately meaningless. But God made us to create and cultivate the earth. He commanded Adam and Eve in Genesis 1:28 to be fruitful and increase in number, to fill the earth and subdue it. And they were to do this not for their own glory, but for the glory of God. They had to be active in their actions. 1 Corinthians 10:31 is clear about this when Paul says, "Do it all for the glory of God." And this is why being passive, lazy, and unintentional is detrimental in the way that God intended things to be in the flourishing life. It's about the intention behind something, and although you cannot intend on being random, you can intend on being out of order or out of line with the way God intended things to be. And this is wrong. And again, this is just one example of the many symptoms that express the deeper issue related to a false theology of beauty. The classical thinkers thought that beauty was based on that which was symmetrically correct. The 5th century sculptor Polykleitos claimed that Apollo was beautiful because his body conformed to the certain laws of proportion and so partook in the divine beauty of mathematics. Because the Greeks held such high esteem for math, they believed that it was a sign of elevating one's mind to the logical sphere of understanding. According to Webster's dictionary, beauty is that quality of aggregate of qualities in a thing which gives pleasure to the senses or pleasurably exalts the mind or spirit, or physical, moral, or spiritual loveliness. A modern definition has narrowed it to mean the quality present in a thing or person that gives intense pleasure or deep satisfaction to the mind, whether arising from sensory manifestation, a meaningful design or pattern, or something else. I propose that the solution to this false theology of beauty is correcting our understanding of beauty by enriching our theology of God. Paul said in Romans 1:20, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." Asaph praised in Psalm 50, verse 2, "From Zion, perfect in beauty, God shines forth." And then in Psalm 27:4, David proclaimed, "One thing I ask of the Lord, and this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord." I propose these 3 practical steps based on Henry Blackbell's spiritual leadership as the way to actively be a leader and seek a solution to this problem. First, I need to remind myself of the nature of God by nurturing my time with him. This principle will recapture an understanding of beauty by spending time with the one who is beautiful. Like what we learned about at the gathering, a disciple is one who spends time with Christ to learn from Christ to be more like Christ. So if I'm going to be more like God, I need to spend time with God to learn from God so that I can be more like God. Second, I can capture a correct theology and embody the values, or in this case, the theology, of what I believe, as Mike Miller and Ken Blanchard endorse in their Serve model. And finally, I can redirect people to God's will, which is the flourishing life. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder, but rather it's in the nature of the one who holds you.